Lonely widower noticed his maid limping while sweeping, then froze when he saw it. It started with something so small it could have been mist, just a faint smear, dark, drying on the edge of the wooden floor near the hallway. Thomas Granger saw it when the morning light sliced through the kitchen window, stretching long across the planks like it always did. He stood there staring at it as if the wood itself was bleeding. He didn't ask. Not then. Not when the same mark appeared the next day, or the day after. The girl, he barely knew her name, was quiet, polite. She moved through the house like wind through old curtains, barely noticed but always there. She swept the floors, made the coffee, wiped the windows without speaking unless spoken to. Her left foot dragged ever so slightly. Not enough to call attention. Just enough to say if you were paying attention, something wasn't right. Thomas didn't pry. He hadn't pried into anyone's life since his wife died. But something about the blood unsettled him. Not in the way danger does, but like an ache you've ignored for too long, now pulsing for attention. It wasn't fear. It was curiosity twisted with guilt. A quiet alarm ringing where no one else could hear. He began to notice more. How she winced, subtly, when bending. How she leaned ever so slightly on her right side when walking up the back steps. And how her eyes, even when still. The third morning he saw it, blood again, only darker, thicker. Thomas followed her. Not with suspicion, but with something quieter and harder to name. She moved toward the back shed, limping slightly more than before. The door creaked shut behind her. From the crack in the frame he saw her sit, lift the hem of her dress. And that's when it stopped being curiosity. Just above her ankle, beneath bruised skin and a line of dried blood, was something metal, crude, invasive, half embedded like it had grown from within her. A jagged piece of iron or some homemade shackle, anchored into her flesh by bolts too cruel to be accidental. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She took a rag, dipped it in a bowl of water, and began cleaning around it, slow, methodical, like she'd done it 100 times before. Her jaw was set, her breathing shallow. The kind of breathing you do when pain is a familiar guest and fear no longer serves a purpose. Thomas stepped back, not because he was afraid of her, but because he wasn't ready for the mirror she held up to him, quiet suffering, endured without complaint. He remembered that look. He had seen it once in his wife's eyes, long before the accident that took her. That same quiet resignation. That same bruised stillness. He didn't confront her, didn't question the thing in her leg or how it came to be there. Instead, that evening he brought a small bottle of whiskey and a hunting knife, wrapped clean in a cloth. He placed them on the kitchen table without a word. She looked at him, then at the items, and for a long moment said nothing. When she finally spoke, her voice was low. "You're not cutting it off." "I wasn't planning to," he said. And that was it. No promises, no demands. Just a man leaving help on the table and a woman deciding for the first time in a long time. It was late afternoon when the knock came, not rushed, not panicked, but with a kind of arrogant rhythm, like the fist behind it had never known the word no. Thomas opened the door to a man dressed in town clothes too polished for the dust-covered porch he stood on. His eyes were the kind that scanned a room before it asked a question, and his smile, if you could call it that, wasn't aimed at greeting. "I'm looking for something that belongs to me," the man said, lifting his chin slightly. "Or rather, someone." He handed over a paper, folded and worn, edges frayed like it had been clutched too many times in too many places. On it was a name, a seal, a signature scrawled with practiced certainty. "She's under contract," he said. "Legally bound. I paid good money." Thomas read the paper, then read it again. It wasn't forged. It was worse. It was real. A certificate of ownership thinly disguised in legal terms. A woman's name reduced to transaction and ink. "She's not here," Thomas lied. "I saw her," the man said, calm as a loaded gun. "Saw her fetching water out back, limping like always." From behind the screen door, the girl stood still. Her eyes didn't waver, but they said everything. She didn't plead, didn't move, just looked straight at the man who once owned her and the man who might protect her. Thomas stepped between them. Something old stirred in him. Not rage, but a refusal. The quiet, boiling kind that builds when you've seen one injustice too many and stayed silent too long. "She's not going back with you," he said. The man's smile tightened. "You really want to start something, old man?" Thomas didn't answer. He didn't have to. The girl's hand, still trembling slightly, rested on the doorframe. Not hiding, not fleeing, just staying, choosing. And for the first time that night, the air outside was still, the kind of quiet that settles only after something has shifted. The man was gone for now. The contract, too. But something heavier lingered in the dark, memory, maybe, or fear, learning how to breathe again. Thomas lit a fire out back. Not for warmth, just something to look at, something alive. She came out without being called. Sat across from him, not too close, not too far. The crackle of wood filled the space between them until silence became a kind of permission. "She was named Elena," Thomas said, eyes on the flames. "My wife. She died because I didn't speak up when I should have. Saw the signs, ignored them. Thought it wasn't my place." He didn't say how long he carried that regret. He didn't have to. The girl nodded, slow. "They sold me when I was 15, told me it was work, told me it was just the way things were." She reached down, touched the edge of her boot, not the wound, but near it. "The first man taught me how to clean a gun before I could write my name. The second, he didn't care if I could read at all." Thomas didn't flinch, just listened. Firelight painted their faces in flickers, half shadows, half truth. "I didn't scream," she said, more to herself than him. "Not once. Because if you scream, they think you still believe someone else coming." He looked up then, met her eyes. And for the first time, he didn't see a girl in need of saving. He saw a survivor, bruised but unbroken, silent but awake. "You should have left me," she whispered. "You're not mine to leave," he replied. They sat there for a long time, saying nothing more. But in the hush between them, something unspoken passed through, soft and stubborn, like a seed finding soil after years of drought. At first, it was a basket of eggs left on the porch. No note, no knock, just there. Then came a loaf of bread wrapped in a faded towel, still warm, a jar of honey. A bundle of kindling stacked neater than Thomas ever remembered stacking his own. He didn't ask where they came from, but he saw who they were meant for. The town had been watching. That much was clear. watching the man who never spoke suddenly draw a line in the sand, watching the girl with the limp walk to the well each morning with her head just a little higher. And maybe, just maybe, the town remembered what kindness looked like. She didn't return favors in grand gestures. She mended the Wilson boy's torn jacket without asking, left a pot of stew on the porch of an old woman too proud to admit she couldn't cook any more, sat with a baby when its mother needed sleep. She gave what she had: time, care, silence turned soft, and it caught on. The town, once brittle with small talk and distance, began to change. Eyes met a little longer. People waved. A man who hadn't said hello in 5 years tipped his hat as she passed. No speeches, no declarations, just the quiet. The courthouse sat like a scar at the edge of town, weather-worn, stubborn, and quieter than it should have been. That morning, no bird sang, no wind moved the hanging sign. Only the sound of boots on dust broke the stillness, and the echo of a man sure of his victory. He returned with confidence stretched across his shoulders like a well-fitted coat. Pressed collar, boots shined, and in his hand papers. Legal. Stamped. Signed. "She is mine," he told the judge, a man old enough to remember laws that no longer stood but still lingered like ghosts in the corners of rooms. "She broke contract, disappeared, that's theft." He didn't look at her when he spoke. He didn't need to. To him, she wasn't a person. She was property misplaced. Thomas stood beside her, not touching, not speaking, just there. A wall. A question. A quiet line between what was and what would no longer be allowed. The judge raised an eyebrow, slow. "And you have documentation?" "Right here," the man said, unfolding papers with a rustle too loud for the room. The judge read in silence. The crowd, scattered townsfolk who'd come out of vague obligation, shifted in their seats. No one spoke. They weren't sure if they should, weren't sure if it was safe. "She's under indenture," the judge finally said. "Term not yet expired. Law may favor the contract." Thomas's jaw worked silently. His hands, scarred from years of farm work and grief, stayed still. "She's a person," he said quietly. "People sign contracts," the man shot back. "So do horses. Doesn't make 'em free." The insult hung there. Then came a sound, soft, unexpected, the creak of an old wooden pew as someone stood. "I saw her tend to my boy," a woman's voice called out from the back. "Stayed with him when fever near took him. I didn't ask her. She just did." No one responded, not at first. Then a man stood too. "She fixed the south fence after the storm, quietly. We thought it was the wind." A third voice, this time from a teenager, face red, hands trembling. "She taught me to write my name, sat with me every Tuesday. She said even if I didn't get it right, I mattered." The courtroom shifted. The silence broke. Person after person rose, voices weaving into one. Some stories short, some longer, but all the same melody. A woman who gave without asking, who healed without words, who showed up where no one else had. She didn't speak through any of it, didn't cry, didn't flinch. But her eyes moved slowly, scanning faces she'd once passed by unnoticed. They remembered her, and now they were remembering themselves. The man with the paper started to argue, voice rising, red creeping up his neck. "You people don't understand the law. She's mine." "No," someone near the front said. "She's ours." not in possession, but in belonging. The judge leaned back, exhaled. Law has its place, he said, but so does decency. He looked down at the contract, then folded it slowly, deliberately. This court recognizes no person as property, not anymore. This case is closed. The man stared, stunned, not just at the ruling but at the people who had once looked away and now refused to. He left in silence. No papers, no pride. And when the door shut behind him, it sounded less like an ending and more like something beginning. A town that had long forgotten how to protect its own had finally remembered, not with fanfare, not with fists, but with the strength of standing up for someone who. The storm never came, but the clouds lingered, low and heavy, like a breath held too long. The house was quieter than usual, as if even the wind knew to leave it be. Thomas sat alone at the kitchen table, the fire long gone cold behind him. A single lamp cast a dull circle of light, and in front of him, spread out like a confession, was a wooden box he'd kept sealed for years. He opened it slowly, reverently. Inside were pieces of a life left untouched, an old brooch, a faded ribbon, a pair of gloves that hadn't fit anyone since she passed, and the letter, still sealed. He held it like something fragile, though it had outlived the hands that wrote it. Her handwriting was still distinct, angular, sure, with the smallest curl at the bottom of every T. He hadn't opened it the night she died. He hadn't opened it during the long winter after. He wasn't ready. But tonight, something was different. He unfolded the flap with deliberate care, breath catching in his throat like a man who knows he's about to be forgiven or damned. If you're reading this, Thomas, it means you're still alive, and that's something. You were always good at quiet. You made silence feel safe, but sometimes safe becomes small. I know you loved me, I never doubted that. But I needed you to say something when the world went wrong. I needed you to fight for me, for what was right, not just wait it out. So if you're reading this, I hope you found someone. I hope you found a moment when silence felt wrong and you chose to speak. His hand trembled. The words didn't scold, they understood. And that's what cut deepest. Across the room, the clock ticked softly. He hadn't noticed how much noise that thing made, or how loud loneliness could feel when it had company just a door away. He didn't hear her enter. The girl stepped in without a word, wrapped in a shawl too thin for the chill. Her bare feet made no sound. She paused when she saw him, saw the letter in his hand, the stillness in his shoulders. She didn't ask. He looked up. "She wrote this the day before the accident," he said, voice rough from disuse. "I didn't read it until now." The girl said nothing, but her eyes didn't turn away. "I wasn't brave," he added. "Not for her, not when it counted." She came closer, gently placed a hand on his shoulder. Not heavy, not pitying. Just present. "I used to think doing nothing meant peace," he whispered. "But sometimes it means absence. I let her face things alone." "You didn't let me," the girl said softly. He looked up again, and in that look was something not quite forgiveness, but the space where forgiveness could grow. A kind of understanding that only two wounded people could share. "You never asked for saving," he said. "I never expected it," she replied, "but you showed up anyway." He folded the letter and placed it back in the box, then closed it, not to hide the past but to honor it. Elena had given him her final truth, not a reprimand. A nudge, a whisper through the pages that loving someone meant showing up when it mattered. He hadn't saved her, but maybe he was learning to save something now, something that looked like redemption not in grand gestures, but in slow, steady acts of presence. It started with the smell of something cooking, not food exactly, but something familiar, something warm, something forgotten. Thomas didn't notice it at first. The house had been quiet for so long even small sounds felt like echoes. But one morning, he woke earlier than usual and heard the soft clang of a spoon against the side of a tin pot. Not the efficient clatter of someone hired to cook, but the careful, half-humming rhythm of someone doing it for herself. She was barefoot. The windows were open. The morning light fell in soft on her back as she stirred. He didn't say anything, just stood in the hallway, a shadow against the wall, and watched. That day she made coffee stronger than he liked. He drank it anyway. Later she fixed a tear in the curtain, replanted the wilted basil, stacked wood beside the fireplace without being asked. Not because she had to, because the house was hers now too, and she moved through it like someone claiming not just space, but peace. Weeks passed like that, slow, undemanding, full of small restorations. They painted the front porch together, arguing gently over color but settling on a soft gray that looked like the morning sky just before it rained. She laughed when he dropped the brush. He smiled when she got paint on her cheek. They began tending the garden again, not for harvest, not yet, but to feel dirt under their fingernails. She taught him how to tie tomato stalks to sticks. He taught her how to tell real storms from bluffs by watching the birds. Inside, the kitchen became the center of it all. She baked bread, small loaves, dense and imperfect. He built a spice rack from leftover wood. She drew chalk shapes on the floor for the neighbor's child. He carved spoons when his hands needed something to do. And then came the jars. One by one she filled them. Dried herbs, pickled onions, preserves so sweet they made your teeth ache. They lined the shelf by the window, each a memory sealed in glass. She labeled them in tight handwriting. Sometimes he caught her whispering the names aloud. Lavender, thyme, peach. Each one a sign she was staying. He started leaving the door open without thinking. One morning a boy wandered in with a cut on his knee. She cleaned it, wrapped it, sent him home with a biscuit. The next day his sister brought back eggs. Then came the letters. A neighbor asking if she could help write something to her son in the army. Another asking if she could read a legal form she didn't understand. She never said no. And word spread, as it always does in small places. The woman who once limped in silence now walked with purpose. The man who once sat alone now had a second chair pulled out beside him. People came not to gawk, not to thank, but to be near whatever had started to grow there, not in the soil but in the air, in the way they looked at each other. Not everyone approved. There were whispers, especially from the ones who only understood strength in volume. But no one could deny the house had changed. The town had changed, quietly, like snow melting into spring. He found her one evening, staring out the window with a cup of tea in hand. "You ever think you'd end up here?" he asked. She didn't answer right away. Just watched the wind move through the tall grass beyond the fence line. I didn't think I'd end up anywhere, she finally. There was no wedding, no bouquet, no vows, no golden hour photograph to frame above the mantel, just 2 cups of tea steaming gently on a wooden table worn soft by time. He sat in his usual chair, she in hers. A breeze slipped through the open window, carrying the scent of mint and sun-warmed earth. The house didn't shine. It didn't sparkle, but it was warm in the way that mattered, quiet, steady, known. The kind of warmth that came not from fire but from presence. They didn't speak much. They didn't have to. The door stayed unlocked now, not from oversight but intention. There was nothing left to guard, nothing left to fear. Only mornings to rise into, meals to share, a rhythm neither of them planned but both had come to rely on. They weren't bound by title or need or loneliness. They stayed because staying felt like breathing. Because after everything, hurt, silence, shame, they had walked through the worst and come out softer. She no longer limped. He no longer looked over his shoulder, waiting for grief to return. They didn't save each other. That's not how it works. But they gave each other room to save themselves. Outside, the grass swayed, the wind hummed, and the town moved on quieter now, kinder in small ways. And if you passed by the house at just the right time, you might hear laughter, or the clink of a spoon, or nothing at all, but you'd feel it, that low, slow